that door beside you.
Okay, members, so that is the public session commenced. So you're all very welcome to the meeting of the Education Committee today. So just usual housekeeping, would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And just for anybody in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and the device is muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi and password details are available on the gallery rules in front of you. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So we'll move straight into item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. So I have an apology from Cara and an apology that has come in from Robbie as well. Is that, did I get that right? So apologies from Robbie and Cara, which are noted. And then we also have, apart from those in the room, we have Danny joining us remotely online. So maybe check in with Danny. Is your audio okay? You can hear us all right? Not a great sign. And maybe leave that with the Clark and team to just double check if there's an issue with connection there. Okay, so that takes us on to Chairperson's business, item number 2 in the agenda. So a couple of things. I think just to make a start to inform members, if you weren't already aware, that we have Peter Martin joining us at committee today. So you're very, very welcome here, Peter. It was good to have you at the informal meeting yesterday evening as well. Peter's replacing Cheryl Brownlee as a member of the committee. So I think it's important we do just put on record our thanks to Cheryl for her work over the last number of months on committee. And we certainly, we had a lot of great input from Cheryl over the last number of months, and we look forward to Peter's contributions to committee going forward. In terms of other items in Chairperson's business, there was an informal meeting with the Department of Education on uniform policy held last week. There is now a record of that informal meeting with the departmental officials, and that's at page 5 in your packs. I would suggest there probably is nothing really to do with that other than to note the information that there is going to be legislation progressing on that in the coming weeks, which is very welcome. I would also just highlight we had an informal meeting with the History Teachers Association of Northern Ireland, and that a note of that will be prepared for next week's meeting. We had a very busy day of activity yesterday. We had an informal lunchtime briefing with Bright Futures, which is a group of parents with children in special schools. And then we also welcomed a range of stakeholders from the community and voluntary sector, the health sector, and various rights organisations. Really groups who have an interest in tackling issues arising from poverty and education and how that links to education. There were lots of good discussions around the tables, and I would hope that the note that we will have for next week's committee on that will help us inform some of our forward work planning in that area, which is one of the areas the committee has identified as a priority for the work going forward. There is a draft press release there in relation to the RSE inquiry. Now that is in table papers, so I'm not sure what page that is at. Page 3 of your table papers. I'm just going to suggest we have an item in relation to the consultation on RSE just on down the agenda. Probably best to just take those two together at that stage. So I'll just carry that forward to that section of the agenda. So item 3 is declaration of interests. Does anybody have any interest in relation to today's agenda that they need to declare? No. Anything arises as normal, please flag that as is relevant. Item 4 is matters arising, of which I've none noted. So we move on to item 5, and that's the draft minutes. So the draft minutes of our committee meeting of the 11th of September are at page 11 of your packs. So I would propose that those minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Great. If I could just get a copy for signing, and then we'll move on. Thanks very much. Okay. So just before we start item 6 on the agenda, I probably should just just highlight we have quite a light agenda on committee today, which is not our usual state of affairs. We're usually tackling the other issue of having so much on the agenda. We've no idea how we're possibly going to get through it. We unfortunately had a couple of briefings from witnesses which fell through at the last minute, which has left us with one briefing in front of us today. It's not where we would want to be in committee. Normally we are aware there is a huge amount of work to get through, so it is unfortunate we don't have a full sort of suite of witnesses in committee today, but I certainly do not anticipate that's going to be the pattern in weeks going forward. I think we're all well aware that there's a huge amount to get through, but it does.
Questions each.
No. We're not extending question times, David, and there's not a specific period for speeches either being built into the agenda. So that's really just to explain really in terms of why the agenda is that little bit lighter today. What I would say is that when we get to item 8 on down the agenda with forward work planning, it probably just gives us a little bit more time to take a little bit more of a detailed consideration of exactly where our forward work plan sits, where there may be any gaps in that in terms of any particular priority. So we'd ask for members' contributions at that stage. But that brings us on to item 6, and this is an evidence session connected to our relationships and sexuality inquiry, and we're very glad to have representatives from the charity Invisible Traffic here with us today. So Megan, you're very, very welcome. So Invisible Traffic can introduce themselves obviously in terms of the nature of their work. They had expressed a keen interest in contributing to the inquiry, so we are very grateful to have them here today. So I am going to hand over to Megan, who is the coordinator of the Invisible to Visible project with Invisible Traffic. So please feel free, Megan, to make some introductory remarks. We would say up to 10 minutes, and then that'll be followed by questions and answers from members. And also, if you do want to give a bit of an introduction into your organisation and the nature of your work, that would be really helpful. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with you about our work. So, as you said, I'm Megan. I coordinate the Invisible to Visible project, which is our youth programme for 12 to 24-year-olds, and I'll explain a bit more about what I do. And I want to give you an overview of our organisation and how we contribute to the different points within your terms of reference in regards to RSE and your mini inquiry. And I hope that what I say is helpful for you today and can add some insight into how these things are all interlinked together. Human trafficking is the movement, coercion and exploitation of people for profit, and it's for the profit of another person, for anybody that doesn't really understand the term. And it might be a very basic thing to share that, but it's really important that we start from the same space. People use the term human trafficking and modern slavery interchangeably, but the easiest way that I find to differentiate the two terms is to think about modern slavery as the conditions that someone is held under, rather than this is how this has happened, this is the conditions they're under. Invisible Traffic, who I work for, is an anti-human trafficking organisation which has been in existence since 2012 with the vision of making the invisible visible. And we prioritise safeguarding individuals at risk of exploitation or those who maybe have been exploited across the island of Ireland. So we operate within the Prevent strand of the Department of Justice Modern Slavery Strategy. Our primary body of work within Northern Ireland centres around education, and this takes the form of the two programmes that I'm going to talk about today. So we have our junior education programme, which works with children in primary 6 and primary 7. Mostly, and then, like I said, the Invisible to Visible project that I coordinate, which works with young people aged 12 to 24. Our junior education programme does their work through a series of child-friendly short films. They're titled Mission Not So Impossible, and hopefully Tom Cruise doesn't take us to court for that, but that's what they're titled. And we have local young people as actors in these short films, which is great to educate them as they're doing that process. And we also have our Invisible Traffic HQ, or ITHQ, animated characters Busy, Bella and Brave, who provide aid to the many characters fighting this villain called Injustice. So this junior education programme is a 6-week programme that covers the topics of human trafficking and exploitation in an age-appropriate way. It utilises the videos with these enticing characters and a variety of activities to enhance learning and awareness of the topic. And if you think about a classroom of children operating as detectives to figure out this Injustice character, And I'm going to give you an overview of what that looks like over the 6 weeks. So week 1 is basically the introduction to human trafficking as a topic, exploitation or charity, the meeting of the characters who will encourage learning. Week 2 is this trapped video, and it's looking at how individuals can be lured into being trapped by offering something they need. This encourages children to recognise the times where they might be at risk. So somebody dangling a carrot for them, that kind of scenario. Week 3 is our top secret video. It focuses on keeping important personal information and documents safe while discussing the meaning of bravery and the importance of speaking up when something doesn't seem right. Week 4 is our digital cipher, I struggle to say that, focuses on the risks and safety of being online, and it showcases how children and young people can be coerced or tricked into child criminal exploitation. Week 5 is called Prints, and it discusses the UNCRC, how we're all unique, but we all have the same rights. And week 6 is our final week, and it's called Take Your Pick. So it's a game show that allows the children to recap on all of their learning over the past 6 weeks, but also discusses the topics of forced labour and equality. So it's a magnitude of a subject matter that we're covering in 6 weeks, and it benefits multiple parts of the curriculum. So teachers see the benefit of this, but primarily PDMU and the world around us is what's benefited. In one school, we've seen a 69% increase in pupils who knew a lot about modern slavery and human trafficking and exploitation after completing this programme, compared to nothing at the beginning. So we're measuring how this is impacting children and young people. When we mention things like human trafficking, modern day slavery and exploitation, people might have a reaction about that, about talking to children about these subjects, or maybe deem it inappropriate. However, we've been embraced by a broad spectrum of schools, regardless of a religious affiliation. So across the spectrum. We're confident that the education provided in this programme has prevented exploitation of children and young people. The programme is a great resource for schools across Northern Ireland to utilise, but it struggles to get funding. Those who fund charities like ours, they see it as a responsibility of the state to provide this education. So this service is currently free for schools, as schools have such limited budgets, and we don't want that to be a barrier to education. Teachers, as great as they are not experts in all subject matters, and we shouldn't expect them to be, especially a subject like human trafficking, which is evolving constantly, and exploitation, which is becoming more prevalent and more visible in our society. We have teachers who reach out to us and say they're unsure of how to keep children safe from exploitation beyond the school gates. It would be beneficial for funding to be provided for this education at state level, and we're so oversubscribed with this programme that we have school bookings until January 2026. So we have one staff member who runs this entire programme, and we would benefit for having 2 staff members. Our other programme, the programme that I'm part of, the Invisible to Visible project, operates in 4 strands. The first of those is awareness raising sessions for young people, which are 4 to 6 weeks, covering human trafficking, types of trafficking, signs and indicators of trafficking, abusive and exploitative relationships, paramilitaries and their influence, but ultimately how to stay safe from these risks and who to turn to when you need support. Each 4 to 6 week programme is bespoke for wherever we're delivering it. As you're aware, each issue is different in each community, so we need to tailor these programmes to those communities. Our second strand is education of parents and community members to understand the science of exploitation and trafficking. So, for example, if there is a young person who has unexplained income, who maybe wee Jimmy has new trainers, understanding the links between that and potential exploitation is really important to educate communities and parents. How this intergenerational trauma of a post-conflict society is fodder for exploitation, and how it can then be, utilised to control our children and young people. We also see this as an opportunity to educate wider family and community members on illegal money lending and the risks to their families with that. Wider to that, we train professionals, legal professionals, and anybody who wants to avail of training from us. We provide them with language to describe what's going on and what's happening with young people they're working with to spot the signs of exploitation. The third strand is our youth ambassadors, who are sounding board and a guiding light for our operations in the Invisible to Visible project. And I could talk about them all day, but I don't have time to do that. And if you have any questions about them, please talk to me about them, because they're amazing. But the final strand of our programme, the Invisible to Visible project, is our intensive one-to-one work with the most at-risk young people in our community. They are identified through a referral form that we've created. This is for youth workers and anybody really that wants it. We'll provide this form. Now, it's not fully rolled out yet, but it will be by half term, because we've seen a massive gap in the statutory level for services for these young people. We're attempting to fill this As we wait for safeguarding interventions from the Safeguarding Board, we need a safeguarding framework for children who are being criminally exploited, but we don't have that yet. So while we wait, we know that these children are still being exploited, mostly through criminal exploitation, and there's never been a male UK-born child referred to the National Referral Mechanism, which would identify them as a victim of criminal exploitation when we know there's plenty of boys being exploited. This strand of our work covers the children and young people who are in alternative education, who've been removed from formal education, young people in youth centres who are slipping through the cracks of social services. These are the most at-risk young people in our communities. The focus here in this room is obviously around RSE and Today, but our innovative programmes do not only provide advice around exploitative sexual relationships, but build a fuller picture around peer-to-peer exploitation and how one form of exploitation can lead to another, as human trafficking does not operate in a silo. For example, a young woman who's maybe groomed using a loverboy method, which is engaging them in a romantic relationship with the purpose of exploiting them, can then be exploited into forced criminality, as girls are more likely to fall under the radar with police. As much as I'm talking about different forms of exploitation, this all feeds into the same issue. Young people should have their agency protected in their lives, but they do not. The exploitation of children and young people can stem from an inadequate education around consent, choice and body autonomy. We have called for the utilisation of things like Operation Encompass, which highlights when there's domestic violence in the home to aid in the potential, this could aid in the potential exploitation threats of young people, that be sexual or criminal. This could encourage the tailoring of education to specific young people to ensure those who are most at risk of exploitation are provided the education to stay safe. This would also explain why children and young people are maybe behaving in a way that's deemed disruptive. To conclude, I want to talk about the rights of the child, which we educate children on in all of our sessions. And I know you may know this, but it's good to be reminded, I think, of these rights as we're making decisions and talking about things in regards to children and young people. Article 12 is about the right to participation. Adults need to take into account children and young people's opinion when we're making decisions that impact them. We need children and young people to be educated on their bodies and their choices so they can utilise their voice and call out when something is happening. If they don't have adequate information, how can they make an informed choice? Article 19 discusses the protection against mental and physical violence. Our young people are being exposed to indecent images from their peers and from predators. They need safeguard against this mental violence and understand this is wrong and the potential for physical violence that could happen. Articles 34 and 35 and 36 discuss the right to be protected from sexual exploitation, trafficking and all the other forms of exploitation. Again, children need to know what this looks like to be safe from it. Children across the world are exploited through their phone screens by predators, and if they don't have the knowledge of healthy and unhealthy relationships, how are they supposed to stay safe? We want children in Northern Ireland to be extremely safe, but we need Northern Ireland to be an extremely difficult place to exploit and traffic children and young people. And in order to do that, we need comprehensive education. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Megan. And look, it's great at this early stage of inquiry to actually have a provider in giving evidence who's delivering this sort of education in schools, so to give that real on the ground experience and that perspective on things. So it's really, really great to have you here. There's a lot of things that I could ask here, but I'm conscious all members will want to come in. One of the things that I wanted to pick up on straight away and that I thought was really interesting in your Invisible to Visible project was that engagement with communities and parents.
Yes.
Because often this sort of discussion around RSE, it can become sort of pitting young people against parents or schools against young people, and we almost feel that there's different camps involved. But my perspective would be that this all works best when everybody's working in partnership to ensure that the provision is good and fit for purpose. So can you give me a bit more information about what that parental community engagement looks like and what that adds to the provision, and actually again how that adds to actually making it work on the ground in the school?
Yep, so we have had a previous 3 years of funding from the Big Lottery. So this is off the back of essentially 3 years of piloting an awareness raising programme for children and young people. One of the gaps was the education of parents and communities. So in this second round of funding that we've been able to get from the lottery, this large grant that's going to be 4 years, we've seen that we could actually write this into our proposal, and it's so beneficial because we have young people that are going back and being like, I told my mum about this thing, and mum doesn't understand and thinks, what are they teaching these kids in this youth centre, school, whatever. So we're able to offer these nights for parents, and there's a big request for it in communities from Armagh to Belfast, everywhere. So it just really builds that bigger picture for parents to understand, to not turn a blind eye to somebody wearing Burberry trainers and not asking a question, because this is the big thing. We see young people that are spending £600 on a pair of trainers. Where did they get £600 from? It's planting that seed in the parent's mind, who's already got 100 things going on, spinning all these plates, but actually being like, if we want to keep young people safe and we want to help them, the best way we can do is to do that all together. And like you said, it's so important to have that backup of a parent as well as a youth worker. So then that support network is all together working. And it's the reason why teachers, youth workers, everybody needs to play their part. So we can actually then, shelter that child, because we see it in our communities. These children are being exploited day in, day out, and it's not going to stop anytime soon unless we make it stop as the adults.
Just really practically, in terms of the uptake on those sessions, is that those numbers high? What do they look like?
Yeah, so from now until Christmas, we have about 8 sessions with adults. So they're one-off sessions mostly. Some of them a couple of hours long, and we partner with youth organisations or youth centres who already have built relationships with parents. So they're saying, look, I know this maybe seems like a scary topic, but it's really important because such and such is going to be in a group with Megan to talk about, exploitation. So it's good that because no parent wants their child to come home and be unaware of something. So if we can educate them before we educate the child, then these conversations won't be shocking and they won't be shut down either. So we're actually opening dialogue, so the uptake's great. We've got, each session is at least 15 parents per session, so it's going great.
That's really helpful. And I'll ask one other question, because you are a third party provider in this space. It's one of the issues that comes up a lot when we're considering how we deliver RSE in our schools. You obviously feel there is a role for third party provision. There is an alternative view that this needs to be kept in house and that schools should deliver it. Do you have a view on what good would look like? Is there a place for both? What would be your view on that?
Yeah, I think I view myself, and I know my colleague Chloe, who does our junior programme, is the same. We view ourselves as catalysts for conversation. So especially in certain schools and youth centres where these topics are really difficult and these conversations are really difficult, and the schools are maybe controlled or bound by certain things that they can say or not say, I always say to young people, there's nothing you can say that will offend me. So they're saying things, they're looking around for a teacher, looking around for somebody thinking, can I say this? And I'm like, say what you need to say, because if we're not giving them the space to actually ask questions and say difficult or maybe offensive things sometimes, then how do we correct that behaviour? When we have, a culture of toxic masculinity with the Andrew Tates of the world, who a lot of these young men are getting their education from, we need to counter that. So we need to let them say these things and have the space to say these things, so we can counter that with a different alternative and a different perspective from an adult who's not trying to shame them, but also just saying, okay, well, explain more of that to me. Tell me more about this. Be an adult who's curious. A teacher doesn't have the time to do that. They don't have the resource. They have to get through the curriculum. They don't have the headspace to be thinking about what one young person said in that room. They need to be focusing on educating our children on the topics that matter, and we can focus on, okay, well actually we need to address this safeguarding issue or potential safeguarding issue here. They've said something and I've picked that up like this because I've seen this before. And like I said, teachers, you can't expect them to be experts in everything, especially something complicated like exploitation.
And do you feel when you've done your session in a school, you've like a 6-week block or whatever the time scale was, that does that leave teaching staff? Are there resources left for them that they can continue to use and utilise to keep these these ideas, these issues on the agenda for the pupils?
Yep. So every teacher that signs up to do our junior programme has access to our resource centre on our website. So they can sign up and they'll have access to all the videos. So if they want to revisit that later in the year, Chloe's in the videos as well, explaining them at the end. So they have access to that, especially primary school age, when young people might be learning so much and forget something. For the likes of myself, when I'm going into alternative education spaces or youth centres, all of the staff preferably are trained by me. So they all know, and I get phone calls at 10:30 at night, 11 at night, sometimes well past midnight. We're outside a house party. We think this is going on. Do you think this is trafficking? And I'm saying, yep, phone the police, and this is what you say to the police. So we're accessible to those people, and we are the resource, because we'll hold that. We'll hold the expertise for them. Does that make sense?
That's really helpful. That's all from me on that. So I'll pass over to Deputy Chair.
Thanks for that presentation, Megan. It was very interesting. You did seem to focus on girls
Yes.
and the possibility of exploitation. But I think one of the major problems is the lack of education among boys, and you mentioned the Andrew Tate stuff and all of that, you know. So how do you deal with that situation with boys?
So for my programme, the Invisible to Visible project, because I'm working with 12-year-olds, it's a really formative age. I've had a lot of young men who in the recent years have come up against me around the Andrew Tate stuff especially, and just normalised misogyny. But these young men are really vulnerable to being sexually exploited as well. So we don't base our work in our programme around gender, because it's irrelevant in the sense that all children can be sexually exploited, all young people can be sexually exploited, whether that's a method of control or whether that's, through this kind of lover boy method, as we call it. But with young men, the group work scenarios that we have, I'm actually going in to do a group with exclusively with young men who are at risk of being exploited by paramilitaries in the next couple of weeks. So we see the focus for them, and what we've seen amongst young men is this criminal exploitation more than the sexual. So the criminal can lead to the sexual exploitation of young men, but a lot of the time it begins with a kind of brotherhood, a partnership, a friend, you're my mate, and then when he says, actually I don't want to do this anymore, that's when the real person comes out to show the coercive control. So a lot of the issues with young men are around the criminal exploitation of them rather than the sexual, but that we're seeing that have been brought to light. But we're providing the language for them in this group. When we're not being gender specific, we talk about consent. We talk about consent on all sides, and in same-sex relationships as well. We cover all of these topics for everyone. Now, just because boys and men are not talking about sexual exploitation in the same way that girls and women are, doesn't mean it's not happening, like I said. So it's my hope that through encouraging dialogue, encouraging these difficult conversations with staff who are seeing them day in, day out and every single week, that they can then further those conversations on with those young people. If that answers your question.
Yes, it does indeed. And I suppose one of the reasons we want RSE to be rolled out widely among school children is that, especially among boys, there is that toxicity, that misogyny and so on, and then overall the issues of consent and healthy relationships and so on. But given what you've said about boys in particular having that sort of misogynistic view, the Andrew Tate view of the world, have you found any resistance in any quarters to people participating in your programme?
Yeah, but I think that's an opportunity for dialogue. I'm a youth worker by trade, and anybody who works in the community is met with resistance sometimes. But that's when you invest the time. That's when you have to dig in with young men. And I'm a woman who's working with young men. So there's obviously going to be, if there's internalised misogyny there, I'm going to come up against some of that. But there's power in that too. There's power in being a woman working with a young man. You're given a positive role model of a woman to that young man, and actually challenging that young man in a healthy way and saying, okay, yeah, I get why you would feel like you're constantly being told men are bad, and there's women here, or women who are hating men all the time, things like that. You can empathise with that young man in a space that he maybe is constantly shushed, and you can't say that, and that sounds, misogynistic or something. But I welcome that dialogue, because I think if you're a youth worker worth your weight in salt, any youth worker worth their weight in salt would open that dialogue up for a young man to actually express their feelings, and then, from that, hopefully lead to change. And when we have a group scenario, I've had really beautiful, vulnerable conversations with young men, and been able to actually see the perspective of them, and helping them have conversations with young women in the group. When you said this, it made me feel this way. So it's actually really powerful to utilise, you know, the kind of the toxic misogyny that's within, you know, big group dynamics of young people in general. So we've been able to challenge that. We've come against, you know, I had a young person that wasn't really backing down around Andrew Tate after he got arrested for trafficking. And I'm like, well, there's evidence there that supports that. But it actually led to a conversation after the session where, you know, I was with the youth worker and with the young person and just was like, I understand why you think that there's maybe no proof to that, but let me tell you how I think there is proof to that. And he can go away and still have that view, but I planted a seed there that hopefully will then be nurtured. And hopefully, you know, I say hopefully a lot, but that kind of a lot of this is on hope when it comes to challenging these norms, because that young person's going back into an ecosystem where the toxicity might be fueled, which is why it all links together with the education of the community and parents, because then we can kind of challenge that toxicity within that community environment too.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm just looking for other indications. Yeah, Kathy,
Thanks,
anyone else
John.
indicate?
And thanks. It has actually been really, really informative and really useful. Just, I know we're talking about in an education setting, but you've referenced in terms of youth settings as well quite a bit. Do you get an opportunity, or have you had an opportunity to tie in with the Education Authority around that? Are they in Education Authority settings and things like that? And then do you have any links, or do you offer, you know, there's a lot of our children maybe don't get the opportunity to hear the likes of this in schools, but in our sports clubs and things like that. Do you get an opportunity to go into children at that kind of level?
Yep, so obviously we have our programmes in schools with Chloe's programme. My programme for 12 to 24 year olds isn't funded to go into formal education. So we are pushing to the youth work alternative education space. And where it's possible, we will go into post-primary education, but we have to focus around the youth settings, and the most at-risk young people are going to be in those alternative education spaces and potentially youth centres as well. Our programmes are available to anybody. We are members of Youth Work Alliance as well, so we have access to a lot of different sports clubs that are members of Youth Work Alliance as well. So we can get invitations into those places. We haven't proactively looked for invitations to those places because we're so subscribed, especially with our junior programme. But we do, you know, we'll focus on junior and senior parts of youth provision as well. So that's a big focus for us, is to try and see these other places, because, you know, it's very easy to think, okay, RSE in schools, but actually a lot of this education is happening in a youth setting outside of a school. A lot of education happens in the home. You know, all of these different spaces that formal education stops, this other education is still part of that. We go into EA youth centres, we've had meetings with Education Authority as well, around our project, you know, and around the funding issues of that. There's limited availability to funding, and we haven't been provided that from Education Authority or any statutory body. And the likes of the lottery and other organisations, other voluntary people that fund voluntary sector, aren't willing to fund something that should be provided for by the state, like I said.
Thank you.
That answers your question.
Thank you.
Kathy, any other indications? Michelle, yeah. Peter next, yeah.
Thank you. That was really great and really informative, so thank you for that. And you're clearly completely so passionate about the work that you're doing. You know, it really translates. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned, we've talked about the difference between young women and young men.
Yeah.
How far do you maybe tailor sessions to the environment that you're going into? Would you maybe do stuff that's just getting a group of girls together? For the parents, do you look at the location of where it's happening? Perhaps there's no paramilitary kind of concerns in that area. Do you get down in, or do you just do like a one size fits all kind of, or do you get sort of victims to come in and give their testimony to the kids who are receiving this information? I also just wanted to ask about when you're dealing with some of these sessions and you maybe come across someone where they're indicating there's some red flags, perhaps they're being exploited or particularly vulnerable.
Yeah.
What do you do in those circumstances? Do you yourselves do referrals out to other agencies, even the PSNI, for example, or is that something you sort of step back from?
Yep, so to answer your first question, we would do a needs analysis of the communities we're going into. You know, I'm not somebody that's naive to the realities of communities that we're working in, and we're going to have to tailor something different from Broughshane to Belfast, you know, because there's different needs in those different communities, and there's different risks in those different communities as well. And what one young person might deem as unsafe in one community, they'll not deem that as unsafe in the other. So we do have a baseline of what we operate from. So we have a kind of a structure, but from that then we tailor this bespoke programme for our youth in particular. And within our schools programme, that's very much similar. You know, it's the same kind of 6 short films, but the activities then are tailored to those young people. And things, say if we need more time somewhere, we'll take the time that we need so that the message isn't lost. But for the Invisible to Visible project in particular, because we're dealing with these teenagers at a really formative age, we have to do a needs analysis. We have a great partnership with the police as well, especially the Modern Slavery Human Trafficking Unit, and we really actively work on being in good relationship with them. We're part of the NGO Engagement Forum for Modern Slavery Human Trafficking as well, so we build that relationship through that. So in terms of red flags or issues that we see, we'll follow the safeguarding procedure of the centre that we're in. We have our own safeguarding, a robust safeguarding policy ourselves. So if disclosures happen, we obviously keep a copy of that as well. And that's kept away in under lock and key for 99 years now. Like it is, we have to keep things. So long past when I'm gone, they'll still be there. So it's important that we kind of follow those safeguarding procedures. But we also need to respect the place we're in. So if you want to have community buy-in and you want people to keep inviting you back to educate the community, you'd say, hi, you know, this person, Michelle said this to me, and this is what I think's happening. Can we have another conversation with Michelle, or can you just keep an eye out? So something that's maybe not quite a red flag, maybe an amber flag, I'll do that conversation. And then the next week, if Michelle says another thing to me, I'll go, oh, Michelle said this again. I think this is the time where we should be referring this on. We are also first responders under the NRM, so the National Referral Mechanism, which refers people as victims of modern slavery human trafficking. So under Youth Work Alliance, we are first responders. However, access to a national referral, like the form, is really difficult because it's only through one email address through the organisation, and it's a big palaver and issue that we've brought up with the Department of Justice to try and sort with the Home Office. So if we think somebody's suspected of being trafficked, we'll not follow the traditional safeguarding route. Obviously, there'll be a safeguarding route for that to a certain point, but we'll also need to raise an NRM for that child or young person. That make sense?
The fact that you're coming in over maybe a number of weeks kind of gives you the opportunity to see something maybe somebody's holding back, but then a little bit more that they build trust with you, because that's an advantage to it. But that's good to know you have some flexibility there as well, and judgment, I guess, when it comes to that. That's great. We
see it. So I could say, you know, somebody who's working and maybe working and living in the community will not see something as a red flag, and I'm like, hang on a minute here. This is a bit strange. Like other communities we've worked in, this has actually led to us see, you know, this person's actually being exploited in some way, shape or form. So it gives us, we can build a bigger picture, and we're seeing like a bird's eye view of it. Whereas when you're in the middle of it, I know from working in youth centres, you're firefighting. You're constantly trying to deal with all the issues that are happening. So when you have an outside perspective, in the same way in a school, if you have an outside perspective, somebody may notice something that you haven't seen before. So it's important.
Your experience in that particular zone as well, that you'll be more tuned in perhaps to the teacher just delivering the information to what the telltale signs and the red flags are. Yeah,
this is my thing. So my one thing, my blinders are on exploitation and human trafficking, whereas a teacher's trying to think about, this person's getting bullied, this is happening, I need to deliver this, and this. It's too chaotic for them to try and be like, we need to deal with this issue. Now they will, if the need arises, but it might be something that we can help discover sooner with our assistance, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're next.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thank you, Megan, for your presentation, which is just so encouraging. And as I listened, it's a really dark area. Some of the things that happen are just so appalling, and yet you're really shining a light into what I feel is a really dark space. So I'd want to encourage you in the work that you're doing. Just as you went through it, you mentioned, and I didn't get it all down because you talk quite fast.
Sorry.
That's all right. About
10
it.
minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. You were doing very well. I got a lot of info in there. It was about a safeguarding framework that maybe wasn't in place yet, or something along those lines. Do you remember?
Yes.
Can you just tell me a wee bit more about that, and maybe what that is and why it's not there?
So this is my personal battle that I've had for the past maybe 3 years with Department of Justice and Safeguarding Board and such. Child criminal exploitation has just become this new thing that everybody is talking about, which is great. Obviously it's linked to RSE, but it's separate to that, as I've discussed. When children are being criminally exploited, so say if somebody comes up to me in a youth centre and says, I've been criminally exploited, there's a paramilitary that's forcing me to hold weapons, drugs, whatever, or sell them. And I say, right, okay, you've been criminally exploited. We need to raise an NRM. We need to contact police. We need to safeguard this child. I could phone the police and I could raise an NRM, but there's no safeguarding framework for that child. So when a child's been sexually exploited, we have steps and a safeguarding framework for that child. When a child's been criminally exploited, we don't have that yet. We have, within Department of Justice and Department of Health, are working together under an exploitation committee to create this framework. That's going to take time, like all of these wonderful things do. They take so much time, and I'm impatient for change, and I'm impatient for children who are being exploited, hence our referral form and process that we have to do intensive one-to-one work to try and prevent further exploitation of these children and young people. And I personally have networked with other organisations to help support and be a wraparound service for these young people as we wait for the Safeguarding Board and this exploitation committee to come up with the framework. And I'm so excited that we're even doing a framework. As much as it's my personal battle and something I constantly am bringing up, I am really encouraged that this has become an issue that we are talking about. Because a couple of years ago, I was a lone wolf talking about this issue. And now we're talking about it in a bigger space, which is great. But yeah, that's basically there is no safeguarding framework at the minute, and there's no boy that's been no male child's been referred to the National Referral Mechanism who's UK born, who's Indigenous to Northern Ireland. So that's very alarming because we know that boys are being exploited and used in our communities, and we know that they're constantly pawns in a bigger game. So yeah. It's really disturbing.
Just if Chair allows me here, how long have DOJ and DOH been working on the exploitation committee to try and come up with the framework?
So they have only recently, Safeguarding Board's hired someone, I think 5 months ago to do that. There's research that was released, I want to say November 23, maybe earlier than that. I can't remember the exact date. Colin Walsh had released research on the issue. So from the research, then there was the need that needs to be addressed. So yeah, you can find that research. It's really good. It's around child criminal exploitation. But yeah, it's been there was the CPSOG, which is the Senior Officers Safeguarding. I can never remember the acronym, the words in the acronym. So it's the Senior Officers Safeguarding Group, basically. And then that's became the Exploitation Committee. So there's senior police officials and loads of different people within this committee. We're not in that committee, but we're obviously in the NGO engagement group, and constantly challenging, when are we going to get this framework?
Sure. I don't know. It's my first time on committee, so I don't know how this works, but this is the sort of thing that committee can write to somebody else and say, how are you getting on with this? That would be a really interesting one to follow up on.
We usually at the end of an evidence session will gather views on any actions arising. So
Brilliant.
happy to, if you want to bank that one, and we'll collate those at the end.
Thank you, Chair.
I just asked a quick question, Chair. Pardon my ignorance. What's an MRM?
NRM, so National Referral Mechanism. So it's how you identify victims of modern slavery, human trafficking. So with adults, you need an acts, a means and a purpose. So you need to know more information around, how has this came to place, how are they being exploited, who's exploiting them. We don't necessarily need to have names, but you need to have concrete evidence to then verify that. For a child, you only need the kind of act and the means. So basically, I could have a text message that I have saved from a child that says such and such has called me out to sell drugs or something, and that counts as evidence towards this to identify their victimhood. So when an adult goes through the NRM process, say if it's an adult who's been sexually exploited, say an adult female who's been sexually exploited, this will basically trigger a bunch of safeguarding protocols for that victim. So they will get legal aid support, they'll get housing, they might be housed by Women's Aid. A lot of the time they would obviously prioritise their care and keep them safe, and then they will have 45 days to kind of collate evidence to prove that they've been exploited, nearly. So it's like they'll prove they've been exploited, they'll be given reasonable grounds to say, okay, we think you've been exploited, the Home Office will decide that, and then if they can get conclusive grounds, that means you're a victim of exploitation and trafficking. So they can be safeguarded through that.
Conscious Danny is online and may have been trying to come in, but David, I had you next. So Danny, do just shout if you want to come in.
Well, thanks, Chair. And thanks for your presentation. It's been very interesting, and a lot of the questions, I guess, have been asked. The only thing that from what you were saying that I picked up on was the difference between males and females in terms of one was more criminal exploitation and the other was sexual exploitation. In terms of going a little deeper into that, what kind of trends are you seeing? More specifically, what does criminal exploitation mean? Are we mainly talking about drugs here? What are the other elements that we may not be thinking about, and what are we seeing in their schools and so on?
Well, I think if you only need to watch the news to think about criminal exploitation of children, look at the 7-year-old child in Derry who had a petrol bomb in his hand. Who provided that petrol bomb? So that's criminally exploiting that child. They're doing criminal activity. Yes. On behalf of who? So a 7-year-old doesn't have access to a petrol bomb. Who provides that petrol bomb? We see it when children are being forced out to riot, are being offered, there has been countless testimony and research done around this now about children who have basically been encouraged to riot to clear any debt that they owe to paramilitary organisations, organised crime groups, whoever it benefits. So this criminal exploitation can look like that. It can look like selling counterfeit goods. It can look like holding weapons or holding drugs. It can look like dealing drugs, cooking drugs. And then they're given pennies because the risk is so massive, but the reward, they're like thinking this is amazing, when actually they're not a criminal mastermind. They're a child that's being coerced through whatever means. And as soon as they say, actually I don't want to do this, that's when the coercion changes its tune. It's not, we'll give you whatever £200 here or there. It changes to, well, you'll do this or else. We know where your mum lives. We know this. Look, because these people aren't operating in the shadows. These people are known members of the community. Like the people that I'm talking to, the young people I'm speaking to, and the youth workers, like the dogs in the street know. Everybody says that phrase, so everybody knows. But the issue is the community's relationship with the police is so fractured, and people are viewed as touts that they're not wanting to engage with police in that way. So police don't actually have evidence to then act upon this. So we're trying to go in as an organisation educating children and young people around these issues, gather this anecdotal evidence to then communicate with the police or communicate with researchers about what's happening, so that we can make a bigger noise in different forums for these young people. If we're trying to advocate for their rights, and also go past. If we're going to advocate for their rights and amplify their voice, then we need to do that in the proper way and through the proper mediums. So this criminal exploitation, if you look at the news, like I said, you'll see it.
No, and that's a familiar story, and I absolutely agree with everything that you've said there. I guess I was just trying to, I might not be, I was just trying to sort of see if there was anything that maybe we wouldn't be as familiar with that was going on. You drew a distinction there between paramilitary and organised crime, and I know that that's a very Northern Ireland thing that we do, and we understand the sort of what's being said there. It's still very much, and I expect it is, the traditional paramilitary groups that we're familiar with on both Republican and Loyalist sides that you're coming to, you're seeing being responsible for some of that exploitation, or are we seeing a growing element of other organised crime being involved? Is there a change as we get further away from the Troubles, or is that very much remaining the same in your experience?
It's difficult to say. So the firm obviously is a massive organised crime group that we obviously know that is operating, but you know, the difference between, you said paramilitaries and organised crime, and the reason I differentiate between the two terms is paramilitaries have the emotional baggage that they can fling on, and they're operating within communities where they can say, well, you know, if your mum lives here or whatever, you know, and that is something that, yes, organised criminals can do. But if this person's known in the community and you see this person every time you go to your local shop, and they're able to emotionally exploit you and make you believe in some cause that has long gone, you know, you would respond in a different way than any kind of organised criminal. But I do think that paramilitaries and paramilitary groups are transitioning more into organised crime groups from what I'm seeing. Irish, I think it was Irish News today, had a really interesting article about this. And they were talking about how there was a young person who was telling their story in it. And they had said about how, you know, it used to be for a cause and now it's all about drugs and money. And that's so true. We're seeing so much of that activity where these people are operating with impunity, and the cost of that is the pillaging of our children and young people in our communities. And that's not right or fair, to be honest, in my opinion.
I don't agree, and I regardless what term we use, never thought it was a legitimate way to sort of fight for those causes in any case, but thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, David. Check if Danny wants to come in a minute. I just wanted, just with a follow-up question there, really to sort of track this back to the RSE aspect of it. In terms of the exploitation you're referring to, can you give us an idea, and just briefly, because we're coming to the end of the evidence session, but just briefly, in terms of early education, so at that primary level around healthy relationships, what impact does that have as a protective factor in protecting children from exploitation maybe later in life?
Yeah. Well, most people that exploit children are people they know. So if we are educating them on boundaries, on consent and on their body autonomy, then they actually, you know, they're able to voice their concern. If we can give them language, that protects them throughout life. You know, we've had so many different teachers who've spoken to, you know, our staff members who are scared to say certain things, who are worried about response from parents, things like that. But actually, in us coming in and saying things about even friendships, we're talking, because peer-to-peer exploitation is rife, because the people who are their peers that are exploiting them are exploited themselves. So we have exploiters who are operating. So actually, when we give children the language, when they know the scientific names for their body parts, there's countless amounts of evidence out there that states that actually safeguards and protects them, and we know that, you know, that's a known fact. You can find that anywhere. But yeah, with our work and with our kind of education around boundaries and around consent and things that feel funny in your tummy, you know, when you don't feel right, when things don't feel okay, what do you do when things don't feel okay? And we're talking about trusted adults and ensuring that they don't just have one trusted adult, because it's very easy for, you know, people to go, well, mum or dad is a trusted adult, but mum or dad could be an abuser. So actually, when we're saying, okay, who's 3 trusted adults that you have in your life, and one of them is not linked to your family? So it's important that we have these conversations. That just keeps them safe throughout their whole life.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Danny, are you wanting to come in at all? And can you hear us? More to the point.
Asleep on the
I
sound.
take that as a as a no maybe
from Danny.
A no from to the latter question. I'm sure he would have had things he wanted to come in with.
He said that he didn't plan to come in with
No,
questions.
that's grand. Well, look, I mean, unless there's other members want to add anything to that conversation, it's been really great to hear from you today, and this is just more evidence that will feed into our reflections and deliberations around, you know, what good RSE provision might look like in Northern Ireland. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And obviously, just to emphasise that the written consultation response avenue is open to you as well, if you want to have any of that sort of confirmed in a formal sort of briefing document.
Yeah, we will. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay. So in terms of just wrapping that evidence session up, I think in terms of going forward for any evidence sessions on RSE, we will be taking a full note of this, and then we'll be maybe trying to collate those into themes, and then as we come to producing a report, we will look at those sort of recurring themes that are coming through the evidence we're receiving in terms of shaping our recommendations. Is there anything particularly in terms of the evidence we've heard anybody wants to raise that they particularly want to highlight for a key theme to be noted, and then we can move on to any specific actions arising? There was an awful lot in there, but I think we covered a lot of ground. So hopefully there's a good clear note of that. In terms of actions arising, sorry, I'm going to be competing with the noise out there. Well, hopefully it'll pass because it is warm in here. So the one that we highlighted was the National Referral Mechanism, NRM, and around that safeguarding framework. And I would suggest that the committee may want to write to both the Justice and Health departments around where that sits and what can be done to progress that more quickly. So are we agreed on that as an action?
Good, yeah.
Is there anything else arising from that in terms of actions? No.
I thought it might be interesting just to ask Megan to come back to me in writing with some more information about the demand and the number of sessions in primary schools, and then also with the alternative education providers settings, just to that we can see whether that's something that we might want to recommend to other committees.
Yeah.
Should be funded to a greater extent.
Are we agreed on that if Megan can come back? Okay.
Thank you.
That's great. So, look, I'm already in trouble as the Deputy Chair gave me a very firm 1 hour target for today, so I the clock is very much ticking here for me. But item 6.2, and I'm hoping that we can maybe deal with this one quite briefly. So this is a first iteration of the youth version of the survey that we have agreed a survey to go out to various adult stakeholders, but this is a survey we've had some input from the Youth Assembly, so I want to just formally put on record my thanks to the Youth Assembly for their work to bring this draft forward. My feeling would be that if we try and go through this, and I think we hit this obstacle when we were dealing with the survey previously, if we try and do this by committee, we could be here all day. So I would maybe propose that if members have specific amendments, anything that they think is not in there that should be, or that needs any alterations in terms of format or language, that they send those through the clerk, would be my suggestion. If we're agreed on that, I'm certainly happy to work on a bit of a redraft along with the clerk on this, just to make sure that it properly aligns with the adult surveys, and I think there's maybe a need for a little bit of adjustment on some language, but very happy to hear members' views. But if we're content with it, with a feedback process through the clerk, which can then be collated, I'm happy to propose that as an action going forward. Are we agreed on that?
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed.
Just for your information, the Youth Assembly met twice over the summer to consider the survey and give lots of feedback, and the young people were conscious that they wanted to have some trigger warnings, some more explanations of terms, some of the ideas they weren't familiar with, and when the committee has agreed this version, it'll go to all of the Youth Assembly members, also the 350 Youth Assembly consultation forum members, and on the Youth Assembly social media platform. We'll also send it out through the schools system. So
well, it was something that was highlighted last week in terms of ensuring that from the youth end that we got as broad a range of responses through. I know, David, that was something that you were keen to raise. So again, I think that the wider the circulation of this, the better in terms of the responses from young people. Well, look, hopefully we'll have a redraft for next week, and that will take full account of the recommendations of the Youth Assembly, but also just to make sure that that everything in terms of our language and formatting is where we want it to be. Okay, so the only other bit on that item then, which I just carried forward from earlier in the agenda, was the draft press release that was in your tabled papers. Now that is still okay to go, as we are going ahead with the launch of the wider survey, and I know there are a number of stakeholders who are waiting for that to go. So can I just check that everybody is content with the wording of that draft press release to be issued? I'm happy to propose that we agree that to go today. We agreed? Okay. Grant. So that takes us on to item 7 on the agenda. So you'll note in your packs that the clerk, as normal, has provided a note, and that's at page 40. So really, I'll just highlight anything that has a potential discussion for committee in terms of our action. If there's anything that I don't raise today in correspondence that a member wanted to raise, please feel free to do so when I've finished going through the correspondence from my side. So the first bit that I want to highlight, it's item 7.6 on page 77, and that's a copy of correspondence from the Committee of the Economy to the Department of Education. And it's specifically seeking the Department's comments on recommendations in quite an old DARD report on a rural childcare programme. It is relevant to one of our key priorities around early years in childcare. I would suggest that it would be reasonable to flag that correspondence with the Department in terms of our committee's interest in it and ask for their views on the report into that programme. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.7, page 124, and that's a correspondence to the committee from the Economy and the Department of Education seeking an update on their joint working programme. Really, I would want to propose at this stage that we bring forward a further briefing from the department in terms of its joint work programme with Economy later in the year, possibly into 2025. Are members content with that proposal?
Agreed.
Item 7.8, page 136, that is correspondence from the Committee for the Executive Office, who will be coordinating a response from the Assembly to the draft programme for government, and they are requesting a formal response from each committee to the draft programme. We have until the 18th of October to provide that. So I would just want to open this one up for a bit of discussion in terms of whether or not we feel there is likely to be consensus on a committee response to that, or if individual parties would prefer to make their own responses. So I'll open that up to the floor for views at this stage. One at a time.
Well, ideally, Chair, it would be good to get a response from the committee. If that's not possible, then I suppose it's up to individual parties to respond then.
Yeah. I think a committee response would be the ideal place to land on this. I mean, I'm happy to open up the initial conversation on that today if members are content to do that, or if, I mean, we do have until the 18th of October. We can table this on a future agenda if members want to take a bit of time to bring maybe a particular position from each of the parties represented here. We could factor that in a couple of weeks' time for further discussion. Members are agreed? Agreed. Item 7.10, page 160, it's correspondence from the Northern Ireland Audit Office providing a guide on the Department of Education and their work in that space. I would propose at this stage that we note that briefing, although it does merit a read. I would certainly recommend that, but I would suggest, and it is, I think, in the forward work programme. Don't know whether it's firmly agreed with a date, but there is definitely a suggestion of the Audit Office coming in to brief committee on its work in relation to the department, which I think would be something we would want to facilitate. So is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.11, page 174, that is correspondence from the Auditory Verbal Therapy group asking to brief the committee in relation to the need to increase access to early and effective support for deaf children. I would like to propose, as this does link into one of our key priorities, that we invite them to come potentially to an informal briefing of committee. We are very keen to keep a close eye on all issues related to special educational needs provision. Would members be agreed with that proposal? Agreed. Okay, item 7.12, page 177, copy of correspondence from Speakers for Schools, who you will recall have briefed the committee previously in an informal session, and that is about exploring possible work experience opportunities with the Assembly. I propose that we write to the Education Service forwarding that note and forwarding that correspondence just to confirm our interest in it and advise them of our previous briefing we received from Speakers for Schools and our engagement with them. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.13, page 183, correspondence from Retail NI, and it's its response to the school uniform consultation. So I would propose we note at this stage we are scheduled to hear from Retail NI next week in an informal briefing where we can explore that in more detail. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.14, page 192, it's correspondence from an individual regarding concerns about the governance of a specific school. I would propose that we do go back to the individual, thank them for their contact and for putting these issues on the committee's radar, but advise that we don't have a role in intervening in individual schools' governance, and that we could, the clerk had suggested, if members are agreed, provide them with a copy of the Northern Ireland Audit Office Good Practice Guide in relation to school governance. Are we agreed that that's a reasonable response? Agreed. Okay. Item 7.16, page 199. It's correspondence from the principal of Carrickfergus Grammar, and that's regarding concerns about shale pitches and the controlled school estate more widely. Now, I know if Cheryl was here, she'd be wanting to raise this. She was really, really keen to get this on the agenda last week, and it just landed a wee bit too late. So, if you are tuning in, Cheryl, we're raising this one now. I think it is a really, really important issue that is highlighted. I think there are very clear concerns, not only about the quality of the pitch provision, but the safety of it, as whether or not students are in fact safe using the facilities that are available. So I would be suggesting that we write to the EA. It does seem directly an EA responsibility at this stage. May turn out that the department are more appropriate down the line, but are we content to write to the EA and share those concerns and ask for their response?
Yeah, I know Cheryl's been doing everything she can on that one this week. So
yes, yeah, and it's been getting a bit of attention, and I know Danny Donnelly did a member statement on this, and he had suggested, I think, that actually all the MLAs in the area are potentially arranging a meeting on site in the school. So hopefully that will progress things, but I think it is important the committee do note our interest in this one and for a response from the EA. Item 7.17 comes from page 203, correspondence from across the Atlantic from an individual about the use of magnetic phone pouches in schools. I would be content we go back to him and say if he does want to provide us with any more detail in writing about his experience of this technology, we would certainly be happy to receive that. Are we agreed? Right. And other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 40? Agreed. Okay, so that takes us to item 8. Now the forward work programme is actually in tabled papers, so let me just get that open. But I will ask the clerk just to speak to the forward work programme in a moment. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to raise. A couple of them are general and a couple of them are specific, and then we have a little bit more time today, so just if there is anything at all anyone wants to raise in this space. I wanted just to highlight in terms of the informal briefings that we hold on a Tuesday morning. I think it is a really positive aspect of this committee that we engage far and wide, and we always try, where possible, if someone is writing into us, to engage with them. I am very conscious that the demands on members' time are significant, and I am very conscious that Tuesday mornings do not work for everybody, from various school-run commitments to party commitments when they're get into the building here. So I would suggest that we do want to continue, and I would like to seek agreement on this, continue with having the option of those informal briefings. They do allow us to hear sometimes more confidential information. They do allow us to hear it from organisations where the issues may be a bit more niche, but that they are relevant to wider strategic priorities. But I would suggest we may want to in future consider whether written briefings in the first instance may be more helpful, and we can decide at that stage when they're received if we do need to take those forward. Our members agreed with that as a general approach, but always with the caveat, if someone's writing in, it's for the committee to decide. So if I'm suggesting let's hear from them, it is for everyone else to confirm if they actually do want that or not, so we can decide these things in consensus. Deputy Chair, do you want to add anything to that?
That makes sense. Before we issue an invite to any group or individual to come to an informal meeting, we should ask them first to make a written presentation and then decide whether it's worthwhile for the committee to have a meeting with them. I'm not saying a lot of the meetings aren't interesting. A lot of them are, but they don't sort of dovetail in with the strategic priorities of the committee, and in that sense I'm not sure what value they actually bring. So
I think we do need maybe just a bit of a reset in terms of making sure that we're focusing on our priorities. So I very much agree on that front. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I think it's understandable. We have a tendency, I think, to try and be sympathetic where people have issues that are important issues in their sphere of work and are important generally, no doubt. But given the scale of some of the issues that we have to deal with as a committee, I think sometimes that we can't afford to, what small time we have, we can't afford to be giving it out just so people feel that they have had an opportunity to speak directly to us. And I think I think that's reasonable that if they can give a written submission, we can be informed about the work that they do, and if it ever comes into any of the work that the committee's doing, we could do that. I think that's appropriate.
And I think the big challenge is, this committee, it's unique in that we are almost exclusively dealing with children and young people and issues that directly affect them. Everybody who writes in, that's the focus. So it's very hard to say we don't want to hear about that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be clear. We're not trying to close the door to communication, but it is just to make sure that we are making the very best use of our time and our strategic priorities.
The one thing I would say, Chair, is, and I think you've heard this before, and I'm always quite anxious sometimes that if you're not making it along to those, especially if someone from your party isn't making it along to them, that it may seem of a disinterest. I would just be quite keen it would be explained that,
yes,
given the other work and things that are going on, I know from my point of view, being a deputy whip, and if things are coming forward that particular morning, that you're not always able to join. So it's just to be explained to any that we do have in future that those who are not here, it doesn't mean that they're disinterested. Contact them.
That is always something that is emphasised,
Yeah.
that members of other commitments, but a full note goes to committee for everybody to engage with the issue. So that is noted. Peter, were you looking?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Chair, I agree with all the comments beforehand, and my sense, even as a newbie, is we could spend our lives going to meetings and being incredibly busy in this building. But what I found of real value was the evening, that I don't know what day is this. Wednesday? What day was that on?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
It was yesterday. It was Tuesday.
It was a long day.
It was a long day. That's incredible. But that had real value, and I sort of think, if we can find that time for issues that actually, I think the challenge perhaps for the committee is finding stuff like the presentation there that we were all nodding along and going, we all agree with that. These are real issues that are impacting kids in Northern Ireland. And the stuff that we were talking about last night, I think the committee would, in terms of consensus, would all be saying poverty is educational underachievement is really important. It doesn't, everyone agrees on that. So I think finding space for that sort of thing, I think, is real value where we can actually make some impact. But I think shredding the committee's time on perhaps small, as important as they are to certain individuals, I think we shred the committee's time. I think we possibly will miss the really big stuff that actually is really impactful, and sort of just staring us in the face saying, the committee needs to, shine a light on this or look at how this is done. So I suppose what I'm saying is actually, I think I would be really enthusiastic for that sort of thing if we can find space for it. But equally, I think the smaller stuff in bite size, I'm just not sure that really gives value to the item or maybe best use of committee time.
I think there's consensus. So Michelle, do you want to?
I'm just going to say the format last night was really good, because even for those kind of discussions, we got a discussion. You could start asking questions and probing a wee bit, which obviously you wouldn't interrupt and you get to ask after, but it's a different nature of it. So I thought that worked really well, especially something that's starting at 5 o'clock keeps you engaged, because it's very easy at that stage to kind of nod off. So it worked really well. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Also, just when we're talking about how we organise ourselves going forward and getting written briefings, maybe this is someone who's in UMLA and doesn't have a research yet, but the earlier the better. Getting stuff quite late, you're feeling you're coming in and you're not prepared even to make a judgment whether I need to have them in or not. Getting the opportunity to read it would, and on time would be great as well. I know it's not always in our control, but as much as we can hammer that message to people, that would be great.
Absolutely. So that's all noted. I think we've got consensus.
That's actually a just a point, if you don't mind, Chair, that I was discussing with Peter earlier on today, and it was actually more in the context of him being new to committee, and I was saying that sometimes those of us around the table sometimes have a different approach and different view on it, what your contribution should be, and I would tend to give a bit of a preamble and questions, and others think it should be more short, sharp questions and keep it at that. But I think that discussive style allows you to get into a conversation rather than sort of a cross-examination of witnesses and so on. And I think that is needed if you're going to deal with the issue. Sometimes it can't be just you can certainly get facts and you can get what you want out of a witness by just short, sharp questions. But sometimes that discussion is where you find common ground.
No, I thought last night's event was really helpful, and we'll look forward to the note of that coming through. And as we look at forward work planning, there is space built in there for other engagements along those lines. But I think we need to be clear we keep them to our strategic priorities. So that's definitely a point of agreement. So the only other things I want to raise before really just opening it up to the floor in terms of anything specific where we would want to add anything to populate the forward work plan. Just a note for next week, we will have a slightly different agenda in that we have the effective questioning training coming through, which we had something that we raised way back at the start in February. So that will take up the bulk of the committee time, and I know for any members, and I include myself in this, who are newer to these roles, I think that should be a really, really helpful session in terms of making sure that our questioning is effective in our work going forward. So I thank the clerk for organising that. A wee bit of pushing had to be done to get that delivered, so we appreciate that's been provided. The only other two things specifically then, on the 30th, I just would like to make a proposal. We have the Children's Commissioner in on RSE. I have no doubt that he will take the opportunity to raise other issues as well, and we also have an oral update on a really key issue around the SEND Transformation Action Plan. Two big briefings. I would suggest that the EA landscape review may be biting off more than we can chew in that session. Entire reform of the EA as a third item there may not get the time it deserves. So would members be agreed that those two briefings are probably more appropriate rather than the three, and to reschedule that? Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. And then on the 7th of October, I just wanted to confirm, are we content that we issue formal confirmation to the sports bodies, which I think is IFA and the GAA, particularly around PE provision? They were due to brief us in June, and they were bumped really due to pressures around election time. So are we content that we confirm that and get that date locked in? And actually, physical activity really did emerge from last night's discussion as a really important one, so I think it's a good one to have.
Is it worth inviting Ulster Rugby on that as well, given it would be a huge part of some schools' PE?
Yeah, I mean, I'll defer to the clerk on that, because my understanding is that IFA and GAA had a partnership.
They do have it. They have
a partnership in
they also
the
have
PE provision that they
was
rolled
like
out.
They had Game of Three Halves, I think, at one stage as well, which would involve rugby. So they all three organisations have had link-ups at some stage.
If the three sporting bodies are able to attend, great. I mean, I do think there was a specific project with IFA and GAA where they were rolling out PE classes in schools, and I think that's potentially what I
think we could still have a focus on that, but I think if we're going to, I think you might put Ulster Rugby's nose out of joint if you're inviting two of the largest sporting codes and not
I'll defer to the clerk to do all the necessary engagement on that front. But yeah, there's no
I'm not a big rugby guy.
Yeah, we have the Daily Mail as well. That was a recent agreement. So yeah, I will certainly ascertain the availability of the relevant bodies.
I'd be happy, but I'll not go that far.
Speak about the provision in schools. Okay, as well.
Sure.
Right. Anyone want to add some niche sports in? They want to add? No, not that rugby's a niche sport.
Bowling or something. I play hockey, but I mean.
No, that's fine. I think Ulster Rugby is a perfectly reasonable proposal on that. Yeah. So the only other thing, there is lots of space you'll see in the forward work plan after recess. I think we do need to keep a bit of slack there for the RSE inquiry. But really, I just wanted to open it up for a brief conversation. If there are any other particular priorities, organisations, or particular themes anyone would like to see in there at this stage while we have a little bit of space. Michelle?
I've raised this with you, but and it may have come up in the committee before, so it might be my second one. You forgive me if I'm not aware. Governance in schools. I think it came to my mind when we were seeing the stuff in there from one of the pieces of correspondence and the boards of governors, and just even the previous last week, some of the commentary that we had. There's maybe a piece to do around is there something missing in terms of parents and their ability to challenge and complain and to raise objections, and that just doesn't really exist between the Board of Governors, the principals, even their role, and then the NIPSO kind of route. So
it has been raised many times in the committee, but never to the point of really we need to get some briefings. And I'm very happy. I think there are so many issues where school governance crosses over with the issues we're discussing. So I think there is space around the EA department, maybe some of the sectoral bodies, to speak to that. And we already have NIPSO potentially in there. I'm going to suggest that maybe something after Christmas. I'm not sure that we could fit in there if members are agreed, but I think a bit of a closer look at school governance, given we constantly hit the barrier that schools are almost entirely independent entities and we can set all the policy we want, it's not always delivered. So I think that's, I'm happy to agree that, or we agreed on that. Okay. Anybody else?
Also, the audit office have got a good practice in schools report, so they've finally. So we've been trying to get them for a while, but they give so much support to PAC that this is the first correspondence we've had from them in last week's pack, was it, with some material about their perspective on education and the various reports that they've completed. So it may be that the audit office managed to come before NIPSO. But they're both in that governance zone, so I think they could answer relevant questions.
That's all I was going to speak to as well, was just trying to understand the role of NIPSO and what they do and what they don't do in relation to that.
I think that's a really important one to cover. Anybody else? Anything that's missing there? Nope, it's fine. we'd mentioned evening events. 21st of October, there is one potentially slotted in there for youth engagement, which is something we were very clear at the start we wanted to do, so being happy the members could maybe just clear that on their diaries. There's a fair bit of notice there for that one. Okay, so on that basis, are we happy to taking forward those additional bits that we've raised and endorse the forward work plan? Okay, item 9 is any other business. I don't have any that I've been notified of. Is there anyone wants to raise? No. And that just moves us on then. A very strange experience at 3:20 to be saying these words. Item 10 is the date, time and place of next meeting, and that is scheduled for Wednesday the 25th of September, 2 p.m, room 29, Parliament Buildings. And just leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Committee Room 29, sound.